Hey, what's going on, guys? So today I want to be solving question 44 and 45, and this is from the SAT number 16. This is the reading section here. And we have another paired question, which we should know how to solve these. Basically, the idea is that we read this question for 44, and then we go down to the answer choices for 45. We select an answer choice from here, and then we use that to go back and answer the question for 44. So 44 says, it can reasonably be inferred from the passage that the idea that the moon was completely arid was reinforced in part because of something. So a couple things to point out here. So first, we might notice this inferred. A lot of times the SAT will talk about something that's inferred, something that's implied, something that's suggested. I wouldn't pay too much attention to this or let it influence how you answer the question too much. What I find is basically it should signal to you that things may be a little non-obvious. So we're still not going to make any assumptions. We're still not going to read into the text too much. However, we should sort of in advance suspect that it's possible that the answer choice is going to be a little less obvious, or the text is going to be a little less obvious, or we'll have to make like one little logical connection. So what we need to do is we need to go down to the answer choices now, and we're going to be looking for something that the passage says. Basically, the belief that the moon was completely arid, and this word right here means dry. So this belief that the moon was completely dry, why was it reinforced, right? In part because of something. So let's look for something that would reinforce that idea, or did reinforce the idea that the moon was completely dry. So 8 through 11 is right here. That says 6, 7, 8 here. And the finding of unrusted iron metal about after 4 billion years on the lunar surface would seem to preclude even a trace of corrosive water. So this comes in this first paragraph here, where in this first paragraph, basically it starts by talking about all the reasons why the moon is bone dry, right? And there's lines of evidence that point to it. And this is one of the lines of evidence, basically, that iron metal was sitting on the surface for 4 billion years and not even a trace of corrosive water or rust or whatever did we see. So this would sort of confirm the fact that the moon was completely arid and reinforce that. So I would say let's keep it. It's also earlier in the text. So far, everything is good. So 12 to 15 is here. This says, it's a funny thing about conventional wisdom, though. Eventually, someone will challenge what everyone else knows to be true, and once in a while, something really interesting will be found. So this line here basically just tells us about conventional wisdom, especially in science, and basically saying that a lot of times conventional wisdom gets challenged, and then you find something interesting. But nothing really in this line about reasons why we might think that the moon was completely dry, or reasons that scientists would have believed that. So I would get rid of 12 to 15. 15 to 19 says in 1994, a single flyby of the Clementine spacecraft mission produced radar measurements that were consistent with water ice, though many planetary scientists were unconvinced. So this is saying how in 1994 they did a flyby, they had radar measurements, and it basically suggested that there was water on the moon. So this wouldn't be really good for showing that the moon was completely arid, because this is the first line of evidence that there actually is water on the moon, so we should get rid of that. Then we have 23 through 25, which is down here. Still, many experts pointed to implanted hydrogen ions from the sun's solar system wind as a more likely source of the signal. So let's just step back, make sure we understand the context. Right before this, it says 4 years later, after this 1994 mission, the lunar prospector employed neutron spectroscopy, to detect a significant concentration of hydrogen atoms, and hence possibly water ice or water-containing minerals near the poles. So now we have another sort of mission that looked and found water-containing minerals near the poles. And then this is basically saying, still, however, many experts, they thought the hydrogen ions might have been from the sun's solar wind as opposed to being from water. So this also could kind of be a nice answer choice for what we're looking for, because it's suggesting a reason why scientists would still believe that the moon was completely dry. So I'd say we could keep this one. Although to me, when I first saw this one, lines 8 through 11 actually seemed like the strongest one, right? Because they're basically saying, we had iron on the surface and there's no evidence of corrosive water. So I would go back to the answer choices and look for a piece of evidence that would match that. So A says scientists were unfamiliar with some of the powerful analytical tools that were available to them. And if you remember from the rest of the passage, I think this is kind of true, because really the evidence that kind of confirmed the fact that we have that there is water on the moon, that essentially came from, I think it's called an ion microprobe. And it was from this new analytical tool that we were able to 100% confirm that there was water on the moon. So this is kind of true in general about the passage. The problem with it is that it doesn't match any of the texts that we looked at. None of the texts really say, yeah, scientists continue to believe this because these tools were yet to be invented or because they lack the technology. So A is wrong. B says that some scientists were willing to challenge the conventional wisdom about the moon, and that's the reason why the belief that the moon was dry or arid still remained or was reinforced. This doesn't really make too much sense. One, none of the answer choices really talk about the willingness of scientists to challenge the conventional wisdom of the moon or their lack of willingness. But if, in any case, if they were willing to challenge the conventional wisdom of the moon, that would sort of lead them towards finding out that the moon wasn't arid, because the conventional wisdom is that the moon is dry, is that the moon is arid. So if they were willing to challenge that, that wouldn't reinforce that claim, that would sort of go against that claim. So B is not a good answer choice. C says that evidence that might have contradicted this notion could be explained in another way. So this is basically saying that this idea that the moon is completely dry, evidence that suggested this, or might have contradicted this, excuse me. So basically evidence that showed water on the moon could be explained in another way. And if at this point we should kind of recognize that this matches answer choice D here, which basically said here's evidence for water on the moon, or here's evidence that contradicts the notion that the moon is dry, right? These hydrogen ions, but there's another explanation for them that allows scientists to continue to believe that the moon is dry, right? Could be explained another way. This is a good answer choice. It matches D. Here, answer choice D says Apollo moon rocks were not available in sufficient quantities to support valid conclusions. So this should be wrong because really none of the answer choices that we looked at talk about Apollo moon rocks. So there's really no evidence that we have for this. Moreover, if we want, we can go back and notice how even way back here in the first paragraph, when they're talking about all the reasons for believing that the moon is completely dry, they mention that moon rocks from all 6 Apollo landing sites held no detectable traces of water, at least by 1970 analytical standards. So in 1970, they already had these 6 Apollo, they already had these Apollo moon rocks. So when we're down in sort of in this time here, past the 90s and into the 2000s, it's not the case that they didn't have these rocks. They definitely did have the rocks. They just didn't have the tools to analyze them. But so D is wrong. So that is going to leave us with answer choice C, which says that evidence that might have contradicted this notion could be explained in another way. And that is going to match answer choice D from here, which basically tells us that many experts pointed to blah, blah, blah. They had likely another explanation for this. So we can get rid of A because it doesn't have any evidence to match it. And we'll end up with answer choice D for 45 and C for 44.